Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back. Today we're getting back to work on this insane project, the aluminum top stratocaster. Now there are still a ton of things that need to happen on this guitar. It's a big project. The aluminum top, looking pretty cool. It's a little bit small for the neck though, so I need to shave that down a little bit. And that's going to be pretty straightforward. I'm just going to use a file and take some off the edge here. I've made sure that I've got everything lined up so I know where that needs to come off. That'll all be good. Then, in order to prepare this body so that we can actually put the aluminum top on it and still have access to all the electronics, we need to route out all our access from the back. So I've got this thing pre-drilled for all the access points. This is it from the back. From the front, you've seen it. That is to give us, access to all of the pickups, all of where the controls are going to be. The thing looks like Swiss cheese. So we're going to go in with our router. I've got an awesome 4-flute Radian Tools router bit that I'll show you guys, and we're going to clean all of that up. We've got a little bit of an alignment issue from the front here with the plate, so I need to take the chisel of that because this face plate, this isn't going to be just screwed on. This is going to be glued right on there. It's going to be part of the guitar entirely. So that needs to be dealt with. That won't be a problem. And then for comfort, we've got some carving to do. I need this armrest to come down a little bit. I've given an outline of where it contacts this. So we're going to carve some of that out, kind of make it look more interesting. And I also want the belly carve to be a little bit more pronounced. Yeah, lots to do. We might as well get started. Essentially, the rest of this video is going to be in voiceover for two reasons. One, to save some time so this isn't ridiculously long. And two, because I need to protect myself with a mask and whatnot. So make sure that you have the right equipment, that you have a mask, you have goggles. If you need a respirator like I'm going to wear, check out the link in the description to Amazon. I've got all my safety equipment there and most of the other products I use, including this awesome router that I'm going to be using to do most of this work. So check that out if you want any of my stuff. It's an affiliate link, so if you buy something through there, it helps me out. Feel free not to, whatever works for you. Let's get started. I'm just starting out by making sure I check the fit on this. There's a little bit of wood sticking out from the bridge humbucker position there that I'll have to deal with, and the neck doesn't quite fit. So there are definitely a couple things that need to be addressed here. The first of them is this neck pocket. I want to make sure that I get that widened out enough that the neck's actually going to fit in it. I do that with a combination of hand filing and a little bit of Dremel work. I make sure I go in and finish with the hand file even after I've taken the Dremel to it a little bit so that I can ensure that I've got a nice flat edge that's going to go right against the side of the neck. More for aesthetics than anything else. I want to make sure that this thing fits on that neck real nice and tight and that I've got a nice joint there so that it looks good. So the Dremel tool does kind of help me speed things up a little bit rather than doing it all by hand. But again, I come back in with that flat edge file and make sure that everything is going to fit properly. This took some time, but I think it was important to get the right amount of finesse here because this isn't something that I can go in and fix afterward. I can't replace anything. If I take too much off, I'd have to redo the entire top. I end up with a nice snug fit there. Fits around the neck beautifully. That's exactly what I was looking for. So that part is done and ready to go. I make sure that it's in there nice and tight and it slides out okay, so everything's good. Now, in terms of the pickup cavity, like I said, a little bit of the wood was coming out from under where I had it carved out in terms of the positioning that I selected when I made the top. So I just used a pencil to mark out what that would be and went in and took that out with a chisel just by hand. This was a pretty straightforward process. Doing it with a routing template would also make sense, but I wasn't about to use the aluminum top as a routing template for this. That wouldn't have been a very good idea as far as I'm concerned because you risk having the router hit it. So I just go in with a chisel. Pretty straightforward. I'm just using my body weight for this, but of course you can also use a mallet. I find that if my chisels are very sharp, this method works perfectly fine. It also allows me to take off little shavings and make sure that I'm well under control when I do this. Once I get this pickup cavity finished off, which again takes me a few minutes because I'm doing it by hand, could be done quicker with a router I suppose. Once that's done, I'm going to go in and remove the rest of the wood from those access points. So I didn't bother to film myself drilling these holes because I was literally just drilling holes. I used a hand drill and I drilled in with a Forstner bit. But now I'm going to get my router set up with this beautiful 4-flute router bit that we talked about that's designed specifically for doing like the sides of guitars and whatnot so that you can use a template on either side. It takes away some of that tear out that you would usually get because it's got the 4 flutes. It's a great item. Thank you, Radiant Tools, for sending that to me. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up so that it just is deep enough to take away what I need it to. I put it through the hole and I go ahead and switch it on. Now, I'm not throwing a lot of chips here, so for the router, all I really need in terms of safety equipment is a set of goggles. Mask would also be advisable, I suppose, but I'm not wearing one. Anyway, I go in and take away all that excess. I make sure that I have a plan before I do this. Don't start routing unless you know where that router is going to go and why. So I'm using the edges of the cavities that I created with the router bit from the front in a previous video on this series to guide this thing, and because it's got those bearings, I don't have to worry about taking too much off or going in the wrong places. I'm removing quite a bit of this guitar, quite a bit of meat, and I'm creating quite a bit of sawdust. So I do clean that out occasionally to make sure I can see what I'm doing and that it's out of my way. There is a little bit of risk of going too far in a couple places only because some of the cavities are varying depths. So I need to make sure, because of the way that it's routed out for the tremolo and everything, that I'm not going into something that I don't want to be. But in general, I'm taking out full sections of this thing for access from the back. I need access to that portion of the horn because I'm going to be putting a switch or something like that there, and I need access to the control cavity where I'm going to be putting the pots, and I need access to both of the pickup cavities. Now I should say I did just say a switch or something. In truth, I have a custom wiring harness for this that I got from Gun Street Guitars. If you're not familiar with them, check them out on Instagram, Gun Street Wiring Shop. They've got some amazing stuff, and I reached out to them to do a custom wiring harness for me, told them how many spots I had for controls and potentiometers and whatnot, and said, give me something interesting. So I'm really excited to see how it works. I have it. There are pictures of it on my Instagram, which is linked in the description. So feel free to check that out if you want to see what it is. I don't even want to venture a guess. I'm going to have them explain it to me when I go to install it, but I can already tell by looking at it that it's really awesome. So really excited to get to work with that, even though I'm not very good at playing the guitar. We are almost through the routing portion of this. I'm just kind of feeling around to make sure that that everything is as it should be. This works really quickly. It's a really nice big router bit, so it can remove material at a fairly decent pace, take out large sections, and not make too much of a mess, which is good because with the amount that I'm removing from this guitar, it almost would have made sense to use like a jigsaw or something. That wouldn't have actually been practical in the circumstances, but I think you know what I mean. Now I've gone in and painted those cavities, and that's just to make them look good when all is said and done. I'll throw another coat in there later, but I'm doing my carving work now, and this is one of the parts where finesse is most important. So here I have a really special tool on my DeWalt grinder here. This is a saber tooth carving disc. It's the red one. They come in different colors, which are essentially different grits, and they tear through wood like nobody's business, but they're also extremely easy to control. And one of my favorite things about them, they've got holes in them, large holes, so that you can actually see through them as you're using them. And I wasn't really able to capture that on the camera, but I had a line drawn out in pencil, and I was able to see that line and follow it and see what I was taking away. So they've also got some Dremel tools that I'll be demonstrating in a later video, but for now, I'm going to use this for this portion of the carve, this arm carve, and also to deepen my belly carve. They work extremely fast. They're much easier to control than most of the other tools I've used. I find them way more effective than a sanding disc, easier to see what you're doing, and no risk of the burning that you would get from those. Again, as usual, if you want one of those, I do have them in the link in the description. They're one of my favorite tools for carving. Here I'm coming in with just a die grinder type thing, a 3-inch sanding disc to finish smoothing it out and get a little bit more of that finer contour that you get from using a smaller tool like this. You can create a very controlled shape with the saber tooth disc, but because it's so big, 4.5 inches or something like that, I believe it is, I can't get quite the shape that I'm looking for. So having this sanding disc after, 1, helps get that shape, and 2, helps smooth things out because the saber tooth disc does take away a lot of material at one time and leaves a pretty rough surface when you're done. There's definitely some sanding required after the fact when you're doing that. So believe it or not, that wasn't sped up at all. That was the normal speed carving for that arm carve area. And here I'm also doing a normal speed view of me deepening this belly carve significantly. I'm not speeding this up at all. This is actually how fast it goes. So the harder you push on this stuff, the more you can take off quickly, I suppose. But this is a nice controlled way of doing it. Nice controlled speed for me. And you can see I took off an insane amount of material very quickly there. I'm not pushing very hard at all because I don't want to rip into this thing too far. But if you were doing a more aggressive carving or something, you could definitely do that. Now, again, I'm coming back in with the die grinder. I've created a pretty aggressive curve on this. So I started off with kind of a deeper, more aggressive angle at the end there that I'm working on right now. And here I'm just finessing it back, going in and kind of reshaping things just a little bit while I have that smaller disc there. I'm making sure that the angle coming in isn't going to be sharp, isn't going to like dig into my ribs or anything. And I'm going to come back in after this again with an even less aggressive tool. That'll be my dual action orbital sander with the soft pad on it that I use for a lot of my finishing work. And I'll put a finer sandpaper on there and really smooth everything out and kind of finesse the edges together so it's got the look of what you would expect from a belly carve, except with that slightly more aggressive inlet, I guess I'll call it, where the horn is, because that's the more aggressive look that I was going for with this. Funny, I think pretty much everything about this guitar is a little bit aggressive. This footage, again, just like the die grinder stuff, not sped up at all. This is how long it took me to do this belly carve and make it look like this. So, pretty fast process if you're using the right tools for the job. You can also do this kind of thing with a larger belt sander to take away a lot of material at once. I've done it. In fact, it was my preferred method before I got the Sabertooth thing. Even after I started using the grinder with sanding pads, I always found the belt sander more effective until I got the carving disc. And now, of course, as you can see, it's pretty tough to beat the effectiveness of that. So I find this method to be the fastest and the easiest to control personally. Now, gluing aluminum to wood isn't the easiest thing out there. Basically, you can't use carpenter's glue like you would to glue wood together because it's metal. So you need to come up with a different plan. And part one of that plan is abrading the aluminum substantially so that the glue will kind of have something to grip onto. It's got to have those grooves in there so that the glue can cling to those and make it stick. Unlike with wood and wood glue, where you want a very, very smooth surface so that the glue can work the way that it's designed to. So I've abraded that surface on the aluminum, as you can see, and I've sanded the wood surface to make it smooth. What I'm using to glue this together is a product called Weld Bond. So it's a multi-purpose glue. It's used for a bunch of different stuff. I've used it for glass, metal, wood, etc. So I put on a nice thin coating of that. I'm using a foam brush to spread it around as opposed to a card, trying to be very controlled with it. I don't want it going all over the cavities and stuff, but I just put a very thin coating on both sides, basically as quickly as I can, because the open time on this stuff isn't bad, but you know, it's not crazy. You want to get it done as fast as you can. So I go ahead and put that coating on there, spread it around with the foam brush and make sure that I've got as much surface area as possible coated. One of the things about this particular guitar is there's a lot of wood missing. So there's less surface area than you would generally have, I guess. I rectify that just by, again, making sure I've got it all coated pretty much. And then I can go ahead and get this thing glued together. Make sure it's lined up carefully. Shouldn't be too hard. It only fits on there one way. And then I clamp it up, and I end up leaving this overnight, of course, just like you would normally do with wood glue. And that's what the Weld Bond instructions say, if I remember correctly. So I leave it overnight clamped up. I'm clamping it with as many clamps as I can, basically. That's pretty much always what you want to do when you're clamping the top on a guitar. Clamp as much of the surface area as you possibly can. So I follow the same rule on this aluminum top guitar, even though I've never done an aluminum top guitar before. One nice thing about this is I'm going to be texturing the surface of this aluminum in a later video, so I don't really have to worry too much about protecting it from the clamps. I just go ahead and fire them right on there, even though a couple of them are C-clamps with pretty much all metal parts. Not an issue. I do end up with some blemishes on it, but like I said, I'll be texturing this later, so I'll be taking those out. So I think that's about it for the clamping montage. Let's move on to what I'll call, I guess, the fun part. This is something I haven't really done before, a combination of sanding the wood and the metal to get them to match up the way I want them to. So the fit on the aluminum was good, but it wasn't perfect. There was some carving that was kind of done by hand, if you will, on the wood, although not necessarily using hand tools, and the aluminum was all machine cut. So I need to get those to match up properly. Getting this thing clamped to this table was a bit of a pain, as you can see by how much it's moving here. But anyway, I'm using a flap disc now, which is something that a lot of people do use for actually carving wood in some cases. So if you haven't tried one of those, it's not as good as the tool that I showed you earlier, but it does work. It definitely will do the job when it comes to something like this, where I'm going through aluminum and wood. I obviously can't be using one of those saber tooth type tools on aluminum, so this works for both, and so does that die grinder sanding disc. So here I'm going in and doing kind of some custom shaping on this. I'm smoothing out the transitions. I'm putting in bevels. This is going to make some of those transitions look longer or wider, I guess. It's also going to make them more comfortable, and it's going to just generally, well, be what I want. And for me, on this build, that's the important part. So enjoy this next part. You will see me work with this flap disc on the angle grinder. You'll see me come in with the die grinder to try and finesse some of these things and smooth them out the way that I want, and get into some of those tighter curves where the angle grinder doesn't work quite right, just like before. You'll also see me go in with a hand file at the end, because these things, you know, they can round over a little bit and whatnot, depending on what tool you're using, particularly with the die grinder here, where there's a little bit of flexibility to the pad that holds the sandpaper. So I come in afterward with the hand file and smooth out those bevels where I want them to be straight, which doesn't include that carve there, but for some of the other areas, I want those to have a straight angle on them. So I do some of that by hand. Basically, I just spend the rest of the video carving this thing to make it look the way I want it to. So with that, thank you for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you enjoyed the remainder of it here. Again, if you want any of this stuff that you saw me use in it, pretty much all of it is available through the Amazon link in the description, and it helps me out if you use it, so I would appreciate it. Feel free to give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I would appreciate that as well. And remember to subscribe so you can see how this project turns out. There's lots left to do on this one, lots left to go. The finishing process on it is going to be a heck of a lot of fun. And, well, you probably want to see how that wiring harness turns out. So thanks again, guys. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Have a good one.